Hey guys, and welcome back to Bedtime Crime. And today I am actually pretty excited to talk about this case. This is a very highly publicized and just iconic case, and most people I think have at least heard of it, if not know the details of it. So I did my best to find as much information, and maybe there'll be a couple things you didn't know about it, but I do know that this case is really famous. But I thought it would be a perfect time to come up with this video because we know that Ryan Murphy is coming out with his new season of Monster. So the last season he did was about Jeffrey Dahmer, which starred Evan Peters. I know that was a really iconic, series to watch, and now he's coming out with the season 2, which will revolve around the Menendez brothers and the Menendez brothers case. I have heard, I always go into dramatizations of true crime with not very high expectations, just because sometimes when wanting to make things more dramatic, especially when it comes to real victims or real crimes, it can get a little disrespectful sometimes, depending on how it's done, but sometimes it's done really respectfully. And I thought that Evan Peters did a great job in the first season, so I have high hopes for the second season as well. And as you will learn towards the end of this video, there was some other new revelations to come forward about this case, which makes it just overall the perfect time to film this video. Not to mention, it fits in perfectly with my new series that I'm coming out with. So we just finished our Unsolved Cases series. If you weren't able to check that out, please do go check that out. I will leave a link to the playlist of all the unsolved cases that I did. But now it is time to announce the new series, which is going to be family involved cases, which basically means that these cases are going to revolve around inner family connections and inner family crimes, basically. So some of the things that I've talked about have had things to do with the family. For example, Jean-Benet Ramsey. We talked about, like a few of those kind of things. However, not all true crime cases revolve around family, and most of them that I have talked about have not. For example, we don't know what happened to Tara Calico. I guess you could argue that O.J. Simpson was kind of a family involved. Sharon Tate wasn't family involved, all of this stuff. So this next series is going to be purely focused on relationships between the family and crimes relating to the family. So I hope you guys are excited about this new series. I know I am. I have a few really infamous cases to go over, and some that are taking a lot of time to get through the research for them, but I promise that they will be good ones, and I hope you guys are excited. So without further ado, let's get talking about the Menendez brothers. So you can't talk about the Menendez brothers without first talking about their parents, and the best person to talk about their parents first would be the patriarch of the family, which was Jose Menendez. So Jose Enrique Menendez was born on May 6th, 1944, and he was actually born in Havana, Cuba, and he was born to his parents Jose Francisco Menendez Sr. and Maria Carlota. And he was the youngest and actually the only boy in his entire family. And he had two older sisters named Teresita and Marta. And his family in Cuba is what you would call upper middle class. They definitely weren't, millionaires. They weren't super duper rich, but they definitely had a lot more money than a lot of people in Cuba had during this time. They were pretty successful. His father was actually a former professional soccer player, and after he retired from playing soccer, he went on to start his own accounting firm, so that was going really well for him. And Jose's mother actually was a world-class swimmer, and she had actually previously won 5 gold medals in the Caribbean and Central American Olympics, which is really impressive. So as you could see from a young age, Jose was expected to do great things. His parents both came from successes in their own way, and everything that they did, they kind of succeeded in, and they expected nothing less from their son, especially being their only son. According to his sister Marta, growing up, Jose was definitely the favorite child of his parents, and his mother referred to him often, calling him nicknames like Darling, and Marta claims that he was incredibly spoiled growing up. And something else that's interesting, especially what comes to light later on, is that Marta stated that she actually saw her mother molest Jose when he was still only a toddler, and Marta does believe that her mother continued to abuse Jose even when into the time that he was in school. But that is just it's just alleged. This is only what Marta is saying. We have no proof, and none of the parties involved are here to speak on their own behalf, so we only have Marta's word to go off of, really. However, both of the sisters do agree that he was never disciplined as a child, never told no, and never got in trouble for doing bad things. He was actually taught quite the opposite. He was taught that he was superior to pretty much everyone, and that meant that he could do and say whatever he wanted without fear of discipline, essentially. So he ended up actually immigrating to the United States after the Cuban Revolution in the 1950s, and he was only 16 when he came to the United States. And during this time was when Fidel Castro was attacking anyone who opposed him, essentially, and taking over Cuba. And Jose was very outspoken about not liking Castro, not liking him, like the way he ruled. And since he was so outspoken, his parents feared that because of this, and because he was so outspoken about this, that the wrong person who was close to Fidel Castro or in, Cuban politics would hear it, and then he would be either punished or even killed for opposing Castro. So they were nervous, so they decided to send him to the United States out of basically fear of persecution. And he actually ended up leaving with his sister's fiance, and he stayed in his cousin's attic for a little while, and he, went back to high school and everything, and he worked really hard in school and actually ended up earning a scholarship in swimming to Southern Illinois University, which is where he ended up attending with his scholarship in swimming. While he was at university, Jose met the love of his life, Mary Louise Anderson, who was actually a couple of years older. I believe she was a junior when he was a freshman. But her nickname was Kitty by those who knew her, and that's what he was introduced to her as. And Kitty was a communications major at the college, and she was actually a former beauty queen, so she was very pretty, and of course Jose was attracted to this. And she was born on October 14th, 1941, and she was born in Oak Lawn, Illinois. She was also the youngest child, similarly to Jose, and her parents' names were Charles Milton Anderson and May Helen. And she had 3 older siblings instead of just the 2 that Jose had, and their names were Joan, Milton, and Brian, so 2 brothers and 1 sister. And it is said by those who were close to the family that Charles was incredibly abusive towards Kitty, and that after her parents ended up getting divorced, Kitty's mother turned to drinking, and this kind of just instilled kind of a fear into Kitty of getting divorced because she saw what it did to her mother, and this led her to believe that divorce was the worst thing that could happen in a woman's life. She never wanted to get divorced. She wanted to get married to someone and stick it out till the end. So Jose and Kitty started dating. They really liked each other, and they fell in love super quickly. And neither of their parents were actually very supportive of the relationship. This did not stop them. The reason that the parents weren't very supportive of their relationship was Kitty's parents didn't like that Jose was an immigrant, and Jose's parents didn't like that Kitty's parents had gotten divorced. They looked down on that. So both of them were discriminating against the relationship for different reasons, but Jose and Kitty were too in love to listen, and after Kitty ended up graduating, they immediately got eloped in 1963 and started their new life together. So after getting married, they actually ended up moving to New York, where Jose transferred and ended up graduating from Queens College with a degree in accounting, similarly to what his father did. Now, while Jose was finishing up his time at Queens College, he was working as a dishwasher part-time, and Kitty at the time was working as a teacher. Now, after graduating, Jose went into work right away, and he went to work at Coopers and Lybrand. And while they were both working their separate jobs in New York, they had a son named Joseph Lyle Menendez. And he was born on January 10th, 1968. And after this, they ended up moving to a suburb in New Jersey called Gloucester. I hope I'm not butchering that, but I believe I will type out how it's spelled right here, but I believe it's Gloucester. And around this time, Kitty also decided to quit her job as a teacher and decided that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and housewife and take care of her family and kids. And they actually had another son around this time named Eric Galen Menendez, and he was born on November 28th, 1970. So 3 years later, after Eric was born in 1973, Jose started working for Hertz, which we've talked about before on this channel if you're familiar with the O.J. Simpson trial. And he actually worked his way up extremely high to be the worldwide general manager, which is a very high position in the company. And this is also around the time that his coworkers, peers, and especially people who worked underneath him in lower positions than him or worked for him said that he was just very ruthless and aggressive in the way that he handled especially business practices, but even communication with others, and his personal skills were not very friendly. They were definitely more on the aggressive side. And at this time, the boys were actually both attending a private school at the time called Princeton Day School, which is, you know, kind of a bougie school for the boys to go to. And after his time at Hertz, Jose went to go work for RCA Records in the music company. And after that, he switched job fields again and decided to work for the movie business, and he worked for Live Entertainment in 1986. Because of his change in jobs, the family ended up moving across the country to California, specifically the Calabasas area. And this is a very famous and expensive area. I believe some of the Kardashians live in Calabasas. I think Jeffree Star lived in Calabasas for a little while. So Calabasas is a very expensive, wealthy place. And it is said that throughout the years of Jose and Kitty's marriage, multiple people saw him be verbally and physically abusive of Kitty. And multiple people came out and said that he was having multiple affairs and that she possibly knew about this and just kept it, you know, to herself and just looked past it, or she didn't know. Now, these claims are unconfirmed, both about the abuse and about the multiple affairs. However, a lot of people did say that Kitty started using drugs around this time to cope with her failing marriage, and that because of these drugs, she would often lash out and become angry and, you know, become sometimes violent due to being on these drugs that were making her lash out like this. There did also seem to be in the family a little bit of favoritism going on. It seemed like Lyle was always favored by Jose over Eric. But with this, as so many older children will know, there was a lot more pressure put on Lyle, for sure, to succeed, to excel at everything he did. And Eric said that growing up, he had always felt inferior to Lyle and didn't think that his parents appreciated him as much or believed in him as much as they believed in Lyle. So that brings us to the boys' high school lives. So while attending high school, Eric actually became best friends with a boy named Craig Signorelli. And the two were interested in very similar things. They hit it off right away and actually ended up writing a screenplay together, which would prove more important than they probably thought at the time later. And it was called Friends, and not the show Friends, but it's about a son who finds out that he will inherit $150 million upon his parents' deaths, and he kills them in order to gain this inheritance. Now, during his friendship with Craig, they definitely started getting more into the edgier side of things. They started rebelling more, they started doing more illegal things, and they eventually started stealing from people, specifically people's houses. And Eric actually invited Lyle to come along with them during this because Lyle and Eric were extremely close. And it turns out that they actually ended up, during their time stealing over $100,000 worth of stuff. And when Jose got word that this was happening and the boys were getting caught, he made them return all the stuff to the people, and he paid for things that couldn't be returned, that were used or something like that. And Jose was very upset with the boys about these robberies. However, he wasn't upset with his sons because they committed a crime and it was objectively a wrong thing to do. He was upset that they had gotten caught for doing it. He thought that his sons shouldn't have to go through discipline from the police to learn what not to do, and he thought that just the fact that they were dumb enough, in his opinion, to get caught caught just proves that they weren't ready to be as successful as he was, basically. Now, Jose and his lawyer were actually able to work out a deal with the police where Eric would end up taking the full blame for all of the robberies that they had committed and the full punishment, and Lyle wouldn't get anything. Nothing would happen to him. He wouldn't get in any trouble whatsoever. Now, they did this because Eric was a minor at the time and Lyle was not, so it wasn't as serious of a charge for Eric as it would have been and gone on his permanent record like it would have for Lyle. So his punishment was he was given probation for these robberies and was also court ordered to go to therapy. And this is when an interesting relationship starts, and this is when Eric started going to Dr. Leon Jerome Oziel. So after everything with the robberies happened, Jose decided that they shouldn't stay in the same neighborhood that they had literally stolen from. So he decided to move their whole family to Beverly Hills in a really iconic house. I know that everybody talks about the house that they lived in. Multiple other famous people had lived in it. And it was a very nice, wealthy house in Beverly Hills. And both of the boys actually started attending Beverly Hills High School. And throughout their time in high school, the boys got pretty average grades, not straight A's, but definitely not failing anything. And even though they were pretty average in their grades, they were both gifted athletes, especially Eric, who was really into tennis and really cared about being good at tennis. He actually was ranked 44th in the country for tennis players under the age of 18. And after graduating, remember Lyle's about 2 years older than Eric, so he graduated before Eric, obviously, and he ended up actually getting into Princeton University, which made Jose super happy because he had always wanted his sons to go to Ivy League schools. That was always something he dreamed of for his children, and this really made him happy. Now, as Lyle was going through his time at Princeton, he really did not enjoy it. He liked, the partying side of it, and he liked hanging out with people. However, he did not like the schooling, he didn't like the classes, and sometimes he wouldn't even show up for classes, which, trust me, all of us have done. My time in college, I did not always show up to all of my classes, but he would consistently, miss assignments, miss classes to go out and pursue this more partying, the social side of college, if that makes sense. And he ended up saying that the college life just wasn't for him. He didn't like the way the college was set up. And he actually ended up getting suspended from school at one point for plagiarism. So things were not going super well at his time in Princeton. And that brings us to August 19th, 1989. This day, the whole family, so Kitty, Jose, Eric, and Lyle, all went shark fishing with Motion Picture Marines. And Bob Anderson, who was the boat operator that day, said that the atmosphere on the boat between the family members was extremely tense. And he said that he kept noticing that Lyle and Eric seemed to be avoiding their parents, going opposite sides of the boat that the parents were on. And with all of that set up, that brings us to August 20th, 1989. Now, at this time, Lyle and Eric were 21 and 18. Jose and Kitty were watching a movie in the den of their house, just chilling out watching the movie. And the reason that they were watching a movie down there was because Lyle and Eric said that they were going to go watch a movie at the movie theater. So Kitty and Jose just decided to, have their own little movie night at home and chill out. However, as the parents were watching their movie, Lyle and Eric ended up coming back into the den since there was a back door down there that led straight into the den, and Kitty and Jose saw that they had shotguns in their hand. They ended up opening fire on their own mother and father, and Lyle shot his father with a 12-gauge shotgun, and later we found out Jose was shot 6 times, including the one that ended up killing him, which was at point-blank range in the back of the head. Kitty ended up being shot even more times, a total of 9 times, and she was actually still alive even after these 9 gunshot wounds. And the boys actually had to go run to the car and come back to reload their guns to finish killing their mother. Now, when they were going to get the extra ammo and to reload their guns, Kitty attempted to run and get help, but she already had severe injuries. I mean, she was shot 9 times. So she didn't end up getting very far, especially because one of the shots was to her leg and she just couldn't really run. She was more hobbling out. And when they came back in, Lyle ended up delivering a fatal shot one last time to Kitty's face. And after this, they also shot both of their parents in the kneecaps to make it look like it was a mob hit, and this was intentional. And after the murders, Lyle and Eric kind of expected that somebody else would have already notified and called the police, because they did live in a pretty, bougie and wealthy area, and those kind of things just don't happen there. You don't hear a lot of gunshots in Beverly Hills. So they just assumed that somebody else would have called in to what happened and report the gunshots. However, they realized pretty quickly that no police had been called. Nobody was even, coming out of their houses or anything. So they realized that they would have to call the police by themselves. But first, they needed to make sure that they had an alibi for the night. So Lyle and Eric collected all of the shell casings and ended up throwing those, as well as their guns and the bloody clothing that they had on, into a canyon, as they described it, to get rid of any evidence that they were involved. And they then went to a movie theater where they were originally saying that they were going to be, to buy tickets to a movie to corroborate their story of, what they said that they were going to do that night. And when they returned home, they immediately called 911, and I'll play the 911 call for you right now.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem?
Sounds,
What's the problem? What's the problem?
someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, too.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
172 response. 722 North L1.
What happened? Hey, stand up,
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get clean further. Other units responding. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who? You came home and found who shot?
Mom and Dad. You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him! Okay, hang on. Let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay.
And when the police showed up, the boys were absolutely hysterical. They were freaking out, they were crying, they were sobbing, just absolutely hysterical. They seemed devastated that this happened to their parents. And the medical examiners ended up pronouncing Kitty dead at 47 and Jose was pronounced dead at 45. Now, nobody initially suspected the boys at all. And because of this, they didn't test to see if there was gunshot residue on their hands, which is typically just standard practice. But the boys seemed so hysterical to the police and so upset that they didn't even think that they could have had anything to do with it. They, of course, ended up getting, the boys' stories of what happened that night, and the boys explained that they had gone out to see a movie, and they really wanted to see the new Bond movie, License to Kill. However, they said the line was way too long for that movie, so they decided to just see Batman, and of course they had their tickets to corroborate the story. And after the movie, they said they went to the yearly Taste of LA festival, which was in Santa Monica, and they said after they were done at this festival that they came home and that they came into the den and saw their parents just dead on the floor. Now, during questioning, it is said that Eric was extremely emotionally unstable. He was absolutely hysterical, whereas Lyle was a lot cooler. He seemed calmer. He was still, of course, freaking out, but compared to Eric, he seems to be much more comfortable and not as hysterical. So, with that being said, needless to say, Eric was the first to crack about what actually happens that night. He was still seeing Dr. Oziel at this time after, way back when the robberies had happened, and he actually ended up confessing the murders to him. And Eric ended up going to tell Lyle that he had told Dr. Oziel what they had done. And Lyle, of course, became super nervous and he was mad at Eric for even saying anything, but now they had to do something because Dr. Oziel knew what they had done. So he threatened Dr. Oziel, Lyle threatened Dr. Oziel in order to get him not to spill the beans about what they had done. And instead of Dr. Oziel going to the police with this information, he actually just ended up seeing both of the boys, and he recorded all of their sessions on tape, including the ones that did say that they were guilty of killing their parent. Now, during this time, as they're going to see Dr. Oziel, people were starting to get a little suspicious of Lyle and Eric anyways. Lyle and Eric were not very frugal when it came to their parents' money. It had only been 6 months since their parents died, and they had already blown through almost $1 million between the two of them. They were going on vacations to London and to the Caribbean. Lyle ended up buying a Rolex, a Porsche, and he even bought a restaurant at one point to try and, start a business through this restaurant. And Eric ended up using his money to hire a very expensive and famous tennis coach. And both boys started renting Santa Monica penthouses to stay in because they couldn't obviously stay at the house that they were living in, but instead of going for something a little bit more affordable, they decided to choose the penthouses. Now, investigators at this time obviously are still investigating who killed Kitty and Jose, and they were able to find that the sale of 2 Mossberg shotguns were purchased only 2 days before the murders. And when looking at the person who allegedly bought them, who signed for them, it was clear that it was actually not him at all. They did handwriting tests and his signature did not match the signature that was given to the gun salesman. So investigators ended up reaching out to Lyle and Eric just to get their handwriting samples and see if this was a possibility. Eric refused to do this outright. He said he was not going to give them his handwriting sample. And this leads us to when everything starts to fall apart. In March of 1990, one of Dr. Oziel's mistresses was very angry since he had just broken up with her and she kind of wanted to get revenge. So she ended up going to the police and told them that Dr. Oziel was seeing the boys after knowing that they had confessed to the murders of their parents. So police obviously right away have enough to arrest the boys. So March 8th, 1990, Lyle was arrested as he was leaving to go have lunch with his friends. And Eric was actually not even in the country at this time. He was in Israel for a tennis competition. And when he learned of his arrest and that Lyle was arrested, he decided to turn himself in when he came back on March 11th. Now, it ended up being a big point of contention whether or not the tapes that Dr. Oziel had taken of the boys' confessions were going to be able to be used during court, or if this fell under doctor-patient confidentiality. However, because Lyle had previously threatened Dr. Oziel's life to not tell anybody, they decided that these tapes did not fall under doctor-patient confidentiality and that they were fair game to use during the trial. Now, the main goal of the defense during the trial was not to say that the boys didn't do it, because at this point, their goose was cooked. They had admitted that they had done it, but instead they wanted to prove that they did it in self-defense after years of abuse at the hands of their father, Jose Menendez. And the prosecution, every time the defense tried to, say this, shot down all of these claims, and they claimed that the boys had no proof that they had ever been abused by their father. And the prosecution was also able to point out all the money that the boys had spent, and that if you really were grieving, that you wouldn't have spent all of your parents' money. And they claimed that the murders were essentially to just get this money. But the brothers and the defense argued that the boys were in imminent danger and worried that if they didn't kill their parents, that their parents would have eventually killed them. And one of their cousins, Diane Vandermolen, actually testified during the trial that Lyle had come to her when her family was visiting one summer and had confided in her and told her at the time that they were, kids, about the sexual abuse that he was suffering at the hands of his father. Diane says that she told Kitty at the time what Lyle had said to her, and she went to Kitty with this information. But she said that Kitty just brushed it off and said that the boys were obviously lying, that they were trying to get attention. So she said that she never went any farther with it. So there was some very powerful testimonies from both Lyle and Eric. They both testified during the trial, and they both were able to tell their side of the story and what kind of abuse they each suffered at the hands of their father, and how their mother sat idly by and watched them get abused. So this whole trial for everything to get presented took about 6 months. And after the trial, the jury was still split and deadlocked even after deliberating for a very long time, and they could not decide. And it ended up being declared a mistrial, and they ended up having to arrange for a second trial for the boys. And for the second trial, they decided to make this one much less publicized than the first one. The first one, in the judge's eyes, felt that the jurors were swayed because of all of the media attention around it, and he didn't want, a circus in his courtroom, basically. So he decided not to allow very much filming to go on in there. And they also weren't able to talk as much about the abuse that the boys suffered. And this kind of hurt the boys' defense a little bit, because their whole defense was that they did what they did in self-defense because of the abuse that they suffered. So since they weren't able to talk about the abuse that they suffered as much, obviously it seems like they didn't do it in self-defense. So April 17th, 1986, both boys were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So this was obviously devastating for Lyle and Eric, and they were actually even sent to different facilities, so they couldn't even spend time together. Eric went to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, and Lyle ended up going to the Mule Creek State Prison. And while they were in prison, Eric actually ended up getting married to a woman named Tammy, who he had started talking to during the early days of the trial when she started sending him letters, and he ended up writing her back and falling in love with her. Eventually, Tammy went to visit him in August of 1987, and they had already talked so many times on the phone and written so many letters back and forth. And after getting married to her, this also made him the stepfather of Tammy's daughter named Talia, who she had from a previous relationship before she met Eric. And Lyle ended up getting married as well to a former model named Anna Erickson, after she had also started writing him after seeing him on the news. And they got married over speakerphone in 1986. However, they ended up divorcing after only 5 years when Anna discovered that Lyle was writing to other women, and she felt that this was cheating. So in 2003, Lyle actually got remarried to a woman named Rebecca Sneed, and that sort of brings us to where we are today and where Lyle and Eric are today. So Eric is currently 52 and Lyle is currently 55. They're still serving their sentences, obviously, and Eric and Tammy are still currently married. Tammy ended up actually writing a book that did pretty well called They Said We'd Never Make It, which is about her story and her love story with Eric. And Eric actually currently has a job in the prison as a janitor, and says that oftentimes he's picked on or treated badly because of the notoriety of his case, and he feels somewhat bullied in prison because of this. And Lyle and Rebecca are also still married, and Rebecca actually ended up becoming an attorney so that she could help Lyle work through his case and his sentence and possibly work on an appeal. Some good news for the boys, however, was in 2018, Lyle actually ended up getting transferred to Eric's prison, the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, and this has been really good for them because now they're able to see each other and spend time together. And obviously they were so close before the trial, they had a lot to catch up on, but they were able to finally be together again. And other inmates have actually come out and said that Lyle and Eric are super great people. And a lot of prisoners say that they have helped them battle their own demons and that they are very nice, genuine people. However, that doesn't mean that everyone has a good impression of the two men. In fact, the lieutenant at the Richard J. Donovan facility said that he thought that they were incredibly narcissistic, that they came off conceited, and he just felt like that they had super inflated egos and it kind of rubbed him the wrong way. And that actually brings me to why I'm so glad that I picked this time to record this video and to talk about the Menendez brothers, because there have actually been updates to this case for the first time in so many years. And the boys have often tried to appeal their sentences over the years. However, they've always been rejected and their sentences have been upheld. However, they are very close now to being able to be granted an appeal, because new evidence has actually come out recently that could help prove what they were trying to prove during the trial. And this is kind of complicated, but when Jose was still working at RCA Records, it's alleged that one of the members of the band that he signed has recently come out and said that Jose raped more than once when he was only 14 years old. It's not my place to out this person's name, and I just don't feel comfortable saying the name of the person who came out with this claim. You can look it up, it's out there, and I know in the documentary, obviously they talked about it. However, I just don't feel comfortable with that. But if this is true and this person is telling the truth, it would mean that the boys were likely not making up the abuse and that they could have grounds for a possible appeal. And as of May 2023, this is actually currently being looked into by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. They came out and said that the new evidence shows that Jose was a violent and brutal man capable of sexually abusing minors. It also strongly suggests that Jose would have been still abusing Eric as of 1998, just like the defense had initially argued. Even more evidence ended up coming out when they found a letter from way back in 1989 that was sent just 8 months before the murders took place. And the letter was sent from Eric and was sent to his cousin named Andy Kano. And Andy's mother was just, searching through the stuff. He ended up actually dying of an overdose in 2003. And she just recently started going through some of his stuff, and she ended up finding the note. And in this letter, Eric says things like, "I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I can't explain it. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind." So that's where we are at as of July 2023. And yeah, it looks like they're actually closer than ever now to getting a possible appeal, which is crazy that it's been so many years. But tell me what you guys think about this case. Do you think that the boys were really abused and that they did it in self-defense? Or do you think that they were just money-hungry boys who decided to kill their parents for their inheritance? I mean, I've heard good arguments on both sides. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about this case. It's really interesting. It's really a crazy case. And I hope you guys are excited for this new family series that I'm starting. And yeah, please like this video if you enjoyed me talking about this case, and consider subscribing to my channel. It really helps me out a lot. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.